Hi again. I filmed a video in this spot the other day and I realized I actually quite like it. Something about having a table right next to me that just makes me feel more like I'm in charge, I guess. It is today, it's irrelevant what date it is. It's just that it's not January anymore. So I decided to do a January wrap up. It's this extremely original idea where I go over everything that I've read in January. I read 9. I read 9 books in January. I think that might be a personal record. I have no idea how. I don't know what happened. If you follow me on Instagram, you already know this probably if you're that invested in my life. Like if you really wanted to know what I read in January, you would already know. I'm just gonna talk about it anyway. First book I read this year is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. It's very popular at the moment, isn't it? I liked it. I didn't feel too hyped about it. I thought it was a bit heavy on the soap factor. Like there was a lot of gossip about a lot of characters that I just did not care about. But this book is very gay. I feel like that's something that people don't really address when they talk about this book. Elena, what are we calling her? She is in love with Leela, right? Like everything Lenu does, she does with Leela in mind. Listen to this shit. The voice she said in the writing overwhelmed me, enthralled me even more than when we talked face to face. It was completely cleansed of the dross of speech, of the confusion of the oral. It had the vivid orderliness that I imagined would belong to conversation if one was so fortunate to be born from the head of Zeus and not from the Grecos, the Cerulos. The way she talks about her brilliant friend is gay. The shit is gay. I don't know what to tell you. Actually, that is the only reason that I kind of really want to read the rest of the series, even though I didn't love this book. But the parts where Lenu was yearning after Leela, I want to read more of that. I'm considering getting a library card just for the sake of being able to read more of that yearning without having to buy all of these books, because that's 5 of them? Come on, that is way too much. Next book I read was Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winston. I read, 10 now, Jeanette Winston books, and I have come to the conclusion that this is the perfect novel in general, but also the perfect place to start with Jeanette Winston. It's the first book she wrote, and it gives a very good introduction on who she is as a person and as a writer. And also as a character, because she is a character in this book. Anyway, in this book, she just has this very light and funny, silly little tone while she's actually addressing her extremely traumatic past, being raised to be a missionary as a lesbian. She has an interesting life, and she knew very well how to turn that into a really good book. Might have been my favorite of the month, but it feels weird to say that because it was a reread. The next book I read was The Death of Vivek OG, and oh boy, did I have complicated feelings towards this book. Was anyone going to mention the incest? Because I've heard everyone and their mom praising the shit out of this book, and for good reason, because akwaeke Emezi's writing is some of the best writing I've ever read. I loved Freshwater. It was one of my favorites of 2021, I think. So I was expecting the great writing, and the great writing was definitely there, but the incest took me out of it. It was still well written, and it wasn't, I was gonna say it wasn't that disturbing, but it was consensual. I don't know if that matters. The thing is, it would have just hit so much harder if I didn't have to constantly be reminded of the fact that they were cousins. Because it's not like they were we can just call each other by our names. No, they insisted on calling each other brother and cousin, constantly, in every context. And I felt really weird after finishing it, and so I really don't know what to think about it. I don't know what I rated it. I don't even know what I would rate it now. I just felt weird about it. That's all. After this, I felt really weird, so I wanted to read something lighter, and for some reason, I chose Persepolis, which is not light at all, but it's a graphic novel, so I figured it would be easy to read. I think this took me as long as a normal novel to read because, I mean, it is massive, almost 350, so like it still took me quite a while, but it was definitely worth it. This is such a good book. Like, if you want to know anything about the Iranian Revolution, you definitely have to read this. It's very personal, it's very good. Really loved it. I had this in my house because we're going to read it for school this semester. Actually, I am not, because I'm not taking that class this year, but I just wanted to read it. I did, and it was worth it. It was really good. Then I read Open Water. Also conflicted feelings about this one, not because there was incest though, so it has that going for it. This is just a nice black heterosexual romance, period. It does have some very good things to say about police brutality and what it's like to live as a black man, constantly being perceived as something that you're not, because, you know, people have fucked up ideas about black people. And I thought that those parts were really, really good. Also, the prose in this is absolutely fantastic. The writing is literally insane, but at some point it just got a bit too much for me. It was beautiful, but I felt like it wasn't really going anywhere. But I will give you an example of his beautiful writing. You wonder what it means to know someone and whether it's possible to do so wholly. You don't think so, but perhaps in the not knowing comes the knowing, born of an instinctive trust that you both struggle to elucidate or rationalize. It just is. I don't understand why I still bother trying to read things out loud, because I need to stop doing that. I need to just start putting like a thing on screen so you can read it yourself. But anyway, his writing is exceptional, truly, truly exceptional, but I just think this ran on a little bit too long, and it's not that long, so I guess that's not really a good sign. But it was good, but it dragged a little bit, let's just say it like that. Then I wanted to read something that was like actually lighthearted. It didn't have to be lighthearted, I just didn't want to think. Period. I wanted to read it on the train, and I can't focus on anything when there's sound around me, so it had to be something that I didn't have to focus on. I had And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie on my e-reader, and I decided to just read that. I'd actually started that book over Christmas and completely forgot about it. I finished that book really quickly. I was not super impressed with it. I watched The Glass Onion recently, like a week or so before I picked up that book again, and I was like, hey, hold on, that's the exact same thing. And then so I wasn't super wowed with the concept or anything. I wasn't really invested in it all that much, but I finally read it. Agatha Christie is such a big deal, right? Like, people, I once babysat in a place where I had to sleep over, and like in the guest room they had an entire wall that was fully a bookcase, and every single one of their books was Agatha Christie. How the fuck does someone write that many books in their lifetime? That's insane. I feel like And Then There Were None is like the most well-known Agatha Christie, despite the extremely problematic original title. I looked that up and I was like, wait, really? It's bad. Yeah, so I figured that would probably be the best one to read to like get a sense of Agatha Christie, and I read it. That's all. Then I read Detransition Baby. Did I have conflicted feelings about this? Kind of, I guess. I don't know what my expectations were going into this, but this is like, no offense to Tori Peters at all, but like this reads kind of pulpy. Like, it reads like something you pick up at an airport to like read on the plane and then forget about. I guess like no, I wanted to say chick flick, but I can't do it. No, I'm not gonna say that in a full sentence. Anyway, this book is interesting. The story is wild. The plot hinges entirely on the audacity of one man who actually isn't really a man. I felt really uncomfortable calling him a man, but they do it throughout the book, so I guess I have to. But anyway, it all hinges on the audacity of one person to expect two women in his life to just want to raise a baby together, even though they do not know each other. It was weird to me in the sense that, like, how does that idea come to you, and why did no other idea of trans family making come to you first? I don't know, like anything that makes a bit more sense than whatever this construction was. The worst part about it for me was, if you have a weird idea for a plot, I don't mind that, but you need to be able to convince me that it works. The author didn't do that. She didn't pull through. Maybe it's a bit of a spoiler, but like, I was expecting this. I was hoping this would go in a completely different direction than it did. But other than that, you know, it did discuss a lot of hard-hitting topics about being trans and about motherhood. Those were really important things to have going on in a very mainstream book. This probably brings along a lot of discussions about these things. So it does have that going for it. And story-wise, I don't know. I mean, it's not the best trans book that exists, but it is the most talked about, I think. Well, anyway, I had a good time reading it though. I will say that, like, I got very invested in the drama at one point and I did not want to put it down. Like, I was a bit obsessed. It's not a bad book, it's just felt a bit weird about the execution. Then I read Intimations by Zadie Smith. I actually read this like alongside some of these other books. I wasn't deeply impressed with this one either. These are essays that were written throughout the start of the pandemic, but also kind of before the pandemic. More like just goes into like daily life in New York City. The basic things you see out on the streets, the neighbors and the people that you see when you go out for coffee and things like that. It doesn't really go into anything super deeply, but there were two essays that I did really like. And one of them was the one where she compared police brutality, just systematic racism, to a pandemic, or well, a virus. That one really worked really well. That was really well done. Then at the end of it, there's like an actual list of intimations, like lessons that she's learned from random people in her life, ranging from her mother to like some random girl who used to live down the block from her to Virginia Woolf. All these people that she's like picked up random life lessons from. I like that one too. Other than that, it was fine. The last book I read was The Gap of Time by the one and only. Yeah, this was fine. It's a retelling of The Winter's Tale by Shakespeare. I didn't know anything about The Winter's Tale, but she gives a quick summary of the play in the first chapter of the book, so like you can follow along. She's obviously put it in modern times. It actually takes place mostly in America, which is kind of a weird thing for Jeanette Winterson to do, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was definitely the most plot-heavy Jeanette Winterson book I've ever read. She didn't go as hard on the prose as she does in some of the books of hers that are my favorites. It was good, like it was fine. One of the characters is a video game developer, and he's developing a game that is about fallen angels in a city. The city is Paris, and the visuals that they describe are so fucking cool. Like, you just want to play this game. And yeah, there's a lot of things in here that like feel kind of mythical, as Jeanette Winterson things most of the time do. Basically, it's about an orphan. Well, she's not really an orphan. They just don't really know what happened to her parents. She's found in a baby hatch. Basically, the story is about like how she ended up there and how she eventually finds out where she's from. I thought it was done interestingly. I just wish we would have seen more of Jeanette's version of Hermione, because she seemed great, but we didn't really get a lot to see. And also, the male characters in this book are absolutely shit. Like, they are genuinely the worst fucking people in the world. And then there's this guy who's supposed to be like the nice kid, but he's like the most insufferable white boy with stupid issues you have ever met in your entire life. He's like not like other boys because he listens to Radiohead or whatever. This was my 10th Jeanette Winterson book, so now I feel ready to do a whole video on Jeanette Winterson because I have a whole stack of her books right here. Ooh, then I want to go over my current reads with you because I'm reading Big Swizz. I started yesterday and I'm halfway through. Also, after I finished The Gap of Time, I started reading Real Life by Brendan Taylor. To be honest with you, I think it's starting off very, very, very slow and I don't know how I feel about it yet. I'm not loving the way that this first chapter is written. I'm still in the first chapter. I read it for like 3 days. I'm on page 50 and it's still the first chapter. It's still the same scene and I'm just getting a bit tired of the way that he writes, but I'm not giving up. I just paused it because I had to read Big Swizz first. And then alongside those two, or at least alongside Real Life, because there's nothing alongside Big Swizz, I'm reading All the Things She Said by Daisy Jones, which is a book about everything I know about modern lesbian and bi culture. When I first heard about this book, I thought that it was going to be very like white lesbian pop culture, not very deep, but I read the first chapter and so far it is very inclusive and it's very considerate of the different ways that people experience sexuality and gender and still identify with lesbianism in some way, shape or form, and I find that really refreshing. I find it very nice to read that after coming off of Stan Twitter. So those were my January reads. Honestly, I don't think I could pick a favorite. Maybe Persepolis, if I can pick oranges. Yeah, Persepolis. I already know what my favorite for February is gonna be. I think we all do. Anyway, I think I filmed a video the other day and I think I forgot to tell people to read Stonebridge Blues. Read Stonebridge Blues. Thank you for watching, and I don't know. See you next time, I guess. Bye. I forgot what it was for a second.